evidently disposed to make capital out of this stuff of ours. Takes a very emphatic line. Talks of our proposal to use it in the elementary schools. Our proposal to use it in the elementary schools? I said something about that the other day, quite in passing. Little affair at a polytechnic, trying to make it clear the stuff was really highly beneficial, not in the slightest degree dangerous, in spite of those first little accidents, which cannot possibly occur again. You know, it would be rather good stuff, but he's taken it up. What did you say? Mere obvious nothings, but as you see, takes it up with perfect gravity, treats the thing as an attack, says there's already a sufficient waste of public money in elementary schools without this. Tells the old stories about piano lessons again, you know. No one, he says, wishes to prevent the children of the lower classes obtaining an education suited to their condition, but to give them a food of this sort will be to destroy their sense of proportion utterly. Expands the topic. What good will it do, he asks, to make poor people 36 feet high? He really believes, you know, that they will be 36 feet high. So they would be, said Bennington, if you gave them our food at all regularly. But nobody said anything. I said something. But, my dear Winkles, there'll be bigger, of course, interrupted Winkles, with an air of knowing all about it, and discouraging the crude ideas of Bennington. Bigger, indisputably, but listen to what he says. Will it make them happier? That's his point. Curious, isn't it? Will it make them better? Will they be more respectful to properly constituted authority? Is it fair to the children themselves? Curious how anxious his sort are for justice, so far as any future arrangements go. Even nowadays he says the cost of feeding and clothing his children is more than many of their parents can contrive, and if this sort of thing is to be permitted, eh? You see, he makes my mere passing suggestion into a positive proposal, and then he calculates how much a pair of breeches for a growing lad of 20 feet high or so will cost, just as though he really believed £10, he reckons, for the merest decency. Curious this Caterham, so concrete. The honest and struggling ratepayer will have to contribute to that, he says. He says we have to consider the rights of the parent. It's all here, 2 columns. Every parent has a right to have his children brought up in his own size. Then comes the question of school accommodation. Cost of enlarged desks and forms for already too greatly burthened national schools. And to get what? A proletariat of hungry giants? Winds up with a very serious passage. Says even if this wild suggestion, mere passing fancy of mine, you know, and misinterpreted at that, this wild suggestion about the schools come to nothing. That doesn't end the matter. This is a strange food, so strange as to seem to him almost wicked. It has been scattered recklessly, he says, and it may be scattered again. Once you've taken it, it's poison unless you go on with it. So it is, said Bensington, and in short he proposes the formation of a national society for the preservation of the proper proportion of things. Odd, eh? People are hanging on the idea like anything. But what do they propose to do? Winkle shrugged his shoulders and threw out his hands. Form a society, he said, and fuss. They want to make it illegal to manufacture this Heracleophobia, or at any rate to circulate the knowledge of it. I've written about a bit to show that Caterham's idea of the stuff is very much exaggerated indeed, but that doesn't seem to check it. Curious how people are turning against it, and the National Temperance Association, by the by, has founded a branch for temperance in growth. Said Bensington, and stroked his nose. After all that has happened, there's bound to be this uproar. On the face of it, the thing's startling. Winkles walked about the room for a time, hesitated and departed. It became evident there was something at the back of his mind, some aspect of crucial importance to him, that he waited to display. One day, when Redwood and Bensington were at the flat together, he gave them a glimpse of this something in reserve. "How's it all going?" he said, rubbing his hands together. "We're getting together a sort of report." "For the Royal Society?" "Yes." Said Winkles, very profoundly, and walked to the hearth-rug. But here's the point. Ought you?" "Ought we what?" "Ought to publish." "We're not in the Middle Ages," said Redwood. "I know. As Cotter says, swapping wisdom, that's the true scientific method. In most cases, certainly, but this is exceptional. We shall put the whole thing before the Royal Society in the proper way," said Redwood. Winkles returned to that on a later occasion. "It's in many ways an exceptional discovery." "That doesn't matter," said Redwood. "It's the sort of knowledge that could easily be subject to grave abuse, grave dangers, as Caterham put it." Redwood said nothing. "Even carelessness, you know. If we were to form a committee of trustworthy people to control the manufacture of boom food, Heracleophobia, I should say we might." He paused, and Redwood, with a certain private discomfort, pretended that he did not see any sort of interrogation. Outside the apartments of Redwood and Bensington, Winkle, in spite of the incompleteness of his instructions, became a leading authority upon boom food. He wrote letters defending its use, he made notes and articles explaining its possibilities, he jumped up irrelevantly at the meetings of the scientific and medical associations to talk about it, he identified himself with it. He published a pamphlet called The Truth About Boom Food, in which he minimized the whole of the Hickley Brow affair almost to nothing. He said that it was absurd to say boom food would make people 37 feet high. That was obviously exaggerated. It would make them bigger, of course, but that was all. Within that intimate circle of two, it was chiefly evident that Winkles was extremely anxious to help in the making of Heracleophobia, help in correcting any proofs there might be of any paper that might be in preparation upon the subject, do anything indeed that might lead up to his participation in the detail of the making of Heracleophobia. He was continually telling them both that he felt it was a big thing, that it had big possibilities, if only they were safeguarded in some way. And at last one day he asked outright to be told just how it was made. "I've been thinking over what you said Redwood." "Well?" said Winkles brightly. "It's the sort of knowledge that could easily be subject to grave abuse," said Redwood. "But I don't see how that applies," said Winkles. "It does," said Redwood. Winkles thought it over for a day or so. Then he came to Redwood and said that he doubted if he ought to give powders about which he knew nothing to Redwood's little boy. It seemed to him it was uncommonly like taking responsibility in the dark. That made Redwood thoughtful. "You've seen that the Society for the Total Suppression of Boom Food claims to have several thousand members," said Winkles, changing the subject. "They've drafted a bill," said Winkles. "They got young Catterham to take it up, readily enough. They're in earnest. They're forming local committees to influence candidates. They want to make it penal to prepare and store Heracleophobia without special license, and felony, matter of imprisonment without option, to administer boom food. That's what they call it, you know, to any person under 1 and 20. But there's collateral societies, you know, all sorts of people. The Society of the Preservation of Ancient Statues is going to have Mr. Frederick Harrison on the council, they say. You know he's written an essay about it, says it is vulgar and entirely inharmonious with that revelation of humanity that is found in the teachings of Comte. It is the sort of thing that 18th century couldn't have produced even in its worst moments. The idea of the food never entered the head of Comte, which shows how wicked it really is. No one, he says, who really understood Comte. But you don't mean to say," said Redwood, alarmed out of his disdain for Winkles. "They'll not do all that," said Winkles. "But public opinion is public opinion, and votes are votes. Everybody can see you are up to a disturbing thing, and the human instinct is all against disturbance, you know. Nobody seems to believe Catterham's idea of people 37 feet high, who won't be able to get inside a church, or a meeting-house, or any social or human institution. But for all that, they're not so easy in their minds about it. They see there's something more than a common discovery." "There is," said Redwood, "in every discovery. Anyhow, they're getting restive. Catterham keeps harping on what may happen if it gets loose again. I say over and over again, it won't, and it can't, but there it is." And he bounced about the room for a little while as if he meant to reopen the topic of the secret, and then thought better of it and went. The two scientific men looked at each other. For a space only their eyes spoke. "If the worst comes to the worst," said Redwood at last, in a strenuously calm voice, "I shall give the food to my little Teddy with my own hands." 3. It was only a few days after this that Redwood opened his paper to find that the Prime Minister had promised a royal commission on boom food. This sent him, newspaper in hand, round to Bessington's flat. "Winkles, I believe, is making mischief for the stuff. He plays into the hands of Catterham. He keeps on talking about it, and what it is going to do, and alarming people. If he goes on, I really believe he'll hamper our inquiries. Even as it is, with this trouble about my little boy, Bensington wished Winkles wouldn't. Do you notice how he has dropped into the way of calling it boom food?" "I don't like that name," said Bensington, with a glance over his glasses. "It's just so exactly what it is, to Winkles. Why does he keep on about it? It isn't his. It's something called booming," said Redwood. "I don't understand. If it isn't his, everybody's getting to think it is. Not that that matters. In the event of this ridiculous agitation becoming serious," began Bensington. "My little boy can't get on without the stuff," said Redwood. "I don't see how I can help myself now. If the worst comes to the worst—" A slight bouncing noise proclaimed the presence of Winkles. He became visible in the middle of the room, rubbing his hands together. "I wish you'd knock," said Bensington, looking vicious over the gold rims. Winkles was apologetic. Then he turned to Redwood. "I'm glad to find you here," he began. "The fact is—" "Have you seen about this royal commission?" interrupted Redwood. "Yes," said Winkles, thrown out. "Yes. What do you think of it?" "Excellent thing," said Winkles. "Bound to stop most of this clamour. Ventilate the whole affair. Shut up Catterham. But that's not what I came round for, Redwood. The fact is—" "I don't like this royal commission," said Bensington. "I can assure you it will be all right. I may say, I don't think it's a breach of confidence, that very possibly I may have a place on the commission." "Hm," said Redwood, looking into the fire. "I can put the whole thing right. I can make it perfectly clear, first that the stuff is controllable, and secondly that nothing short of a miracle is needed before anything like that catastrophe at Hickley Brow can possibly happen again. This is just what it was wanted. an authoritative assurance. Of course I could speak with more confidence if I